Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my APS-C or crop sensor review of the Sigma 100 to 400 millimeter. This is f5 to 6.3. It is DG, which means it's compatible with full frame, but of course it works just fine on APS-C also. And it has their optical stabilizer, their HSM or hypersonic motor for focusing, and of course it is from their contemporary line. Now, if you haven't watched my playlist already, as I covered this lens on full frame, I'd recommend that you do so to get all of the details. And I've covered the build quality already in that episode, in one episode. And another, I looked at the image quality on full frame. And then in my final review, I covered the autofocus performance. So I'm not going to repeat all of those things here, but rather I'm going to kind of focus on how the lens makes that transition to APS-C. So if you're shooting on, like I am, I'm using a Canon 80D for this review. Canon's crop factor is 1.6 times, which gives this lens an equivalent focal length of 160 to 640 millimeters, which obviously is a very useful focal range. If you're shooting on Nikon or Sony, APS-C, they have a crop factor of 1.5 times, which makes this exactly a 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Which is why I think that for many of you that shoot APS-C, you should really strongly consider this as an alternative to some of the very popular 150 to 600 millimeter lenses. First of all, this is a much more portable lens, easy to carry around. It balances much better on an APS-C body, and it weighs about half as much as the contemporary version of the 150 to 600 millimeter from Sigma, and it only weighs about a third as much as the Sport edition. And so as a result, it's just a better fit here on what is often a little bit smaller APS-C bodies. And on top of that, of course, while it doesn't have a tripod collar, many of you that are going to use this as a handheld lens will find that it just is, it's a much more convenient lens to use. And so it's significantly smaller than what the 150 to 600 millimeter lenses are, but at the same time, it's not hugely bigger than the 70 to 300 lenses. So if you're looking for a little bit more reach than what one of those lenses gives you, and you don't want to have to carry around one of the big, bulky 150 to 600 millimeter lenses, I think that this really will hit a sweet spot for a lot of APS-C shooters. And frankly, I find that in most situations, 640 millimeters is plenty of reach for me. And so let's take a little bit closer look at this in terms of the image quality. My experience says that not every lens makes the transition to APS-C all that well. And while, for example, my primary full-frame body is a 30 megapixel Canon 5D Mark IV, this Canon 80D body has 24 megapixels. And so it may seem to be a smaller megapixel count, which it is, of course. But when you consider the fact that an APS-C sensor has a much smaller surface area, it means that there is a lot of pixels that are packed onto that. So as a result, APS-C sensors tend to actually be a little bit more demanding when it comes to actual image quality and a few other factors. And so I found that some lenses that look fine on full frame, they don't on APS-C. Fortunately, that's no problem here. I've already determined that this lens was very sharp, surprisingly sharp on full frame, and I was very happy to find that it survived that transition to APS-C just fine. In fact, I found the images to be very nicely detailed, and it continues to have that excellent contrast and resolution even at wide open apertures. And that does help to make up for one of the disadvantages of this lens, and that is that it has a small maximum aperture across the whole focal range, which means that really for a good portion of the focal range, you're actually going to be at f6.3, which isn't, that's what we call a slow maximum aperture. And so having great image quality means that you don't have to worry about stopping the lens down to get optimum image quality. So that does help. It has a good image stabilizer, and so that also helps, of course. But note that despite that, this is a lens that is going to serve you best when you're shooting in well-lit conditions. And so if you're shooting, if you're shooting wildlife and you're not shooting at dusk or dawn, it'll do great for you. If you're shooting, kind of like your children's soccer matches in either outdoor, sunlight conditions or very brightly lit stadium type conditions, it'll do okay. But if you're in more dimly lit conditions, expect the autofocus to balk on you sometimes and have a hard time locking on when you don't have a high contrast area. The other thing that is pretty important is that I found when I was testing autofocus on this lens that while it did great for me in most single shot conditions, other than those very dim conditions, I didn't find that it tracks nearly as well as what the more expensive options do. Particularly I'm talking about the higher end 100 to 400 millimeter lenses that cost 2 and 3 times as much. But for most people that aren't dealing with highly demanding, very fast-moving subjects, the autofocus does well enough. And I found that I didn't see a huge difference between my performance on the 5D Mark IV and then this Canon 80D. And so it does do fine for most conditions, but if you're going to shoot very demanding autofocus situations, you may need to look elsewhere. One thing that cannot be argued with is the price to performance ratio here. At under $800, I consider this lens to be one of the best telephoto values out there. And I think that Sigma has done a great job in dealing with this lens and packing it with the features that most shooters need, while not saddling us with a huge price tag. And so I give them a huge thumbs up for that. So if you are an APS-C shooter and you're looking for a relatively affordable telephoto lens for your camera, for under $800 in the US market, you can get this lens, and I think that you'll find that you'll be very satisfied with the results you're able to get optically out of it. And if the autofocus will do the trick for you, and let me just say on the note of the autofocus, I had great accuracy on both camera bodies I tested this on. I did sight everything and calibrate it using Sigma's USB dock, and if you haven't figured out how to do calibration, I have got a playlist here that you should take a look at. But once I got it locked in, I got good accuracy, good consistency. It's just not as fast as what I would like it to be. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you'll look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full written review, also an image gallery where I have a specific gallery included in that is all APS-C shots. Of course, you can also find some buying links there as well if you're interested in purchasing one of these for yourself. If you haven't already clicked that subscribe button, please do so. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.